Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel this elegant puzzle together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Let's get started. It was, I suppose, the sort of evening that one remembers not for the occasion itself, but for the curious twist of fate that transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. Poirot and I had received an invitation to attend the farewell performance of the great Maximilian, a name that carried whispers of wonder in every corner of London's theatre circles. I confess, I had heard only vaguely of the man. Magicians, after all, were not in my usual line of interest. But Poirot, to my surprise, had insisted. "Mon ami," he said, adjusting his immaculate cufflinks. "The art of deception, it fascinates me. To misdirect the eye while presenting the truth, that, Hastings, is the essence of detection itself." The Savoy Theatre glowed with a warm golden light, its facade adorned with a grand poster of Maximilian, arms raised, cloak billowing, a man who seemed to command the very air around him. Inside, the crowd buzzed with anticipation, socialites, critics, and curious minds alike. Maximilian's illness was well known by now, whispered behind gloved hands and within the columns of every gossip page. Terminal, they said, though some called it poetic. His final act would be his final bow, quite literally. Poirot took his seat with a curious glint in his eye. To see a man at the end performing his ultimate deception, this will be most instructive. The velvet curtain rippled, the lights dimmed, and the show began. And somewhere in the heart of it all, though neither of us knew it yet, death itself waited just off stage, ready for its own entrance. The great Maximilian was every inch the showman. Tall and skeletal in his flowing cape, his sharp features exaggerated by harsh stage lighting. His voice filled the theatre, rich and commanding, as though he were not merely a magician, but a conductor of reality itself. The performance began with flair, floating scarves, levitating rings, doves appearing from thin air. Hastings, ever impressionable, clapped like a schoolboy. Poirot, however, sat perfectly still, his head tilted slightly, as though observing some invisible undercurrent in the air. It was the final trick that silenced the room. Maximilian stepped forward, arms wide. "For my last illusion," he declared, "I will defy not only logic, but fate itself." A cabinet was wheeled on stage, a coffin-like box adorned with velvet and brass. Maximilian entered it, his hands shackled, the lid closing with a theatrical snap. A hush fell over the crowd as a countdown began. The seconds dragged, the only sound the ticking of a stage clock. Then, the lid burst open. Maximilian stumbled out, arms still shackled, face ashen, mouth opening as though to speak, before his legs buckled beneath him and he collapsed in a heap on the floor. A gasp rippled through the theatre. Hastings rose halfway from his seat, looking wildly around for guidance. Poirot, however, leaned forward, his sharp eyes fixed not on the fallen magician, but on the stage floor beside him. The curtain descended amid hushed confusion, and moments later, the theatre manager appeared, his face pale and trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice cracking, "I regret to inform you that Maximilian has died." The air grew thick with shock, but Poirot's whisper was sharp in my ear. "Hastings, do you see it? There, by his hand. Look. There, lying on the worn stage floor, half tucked beneath Maximilian's lifeless hand, was a playing card. The edges were ragged, as though it had been torn hastily from a deck. But it was not the damage that drew Poirot's attention. It was the name scrawled across its face. In bold black ink, unmistakable and deliberate, was the name, Hercule Poirot. Hastings, naturally, was astonished. But what the devil is this?" he spluttered, bending to retrieve the card, only to have Poirot stop him with a raised finger. "Non, mon ami," Poirot murmured. "You think only with your eyes. Think with your mind. Why would a dying magician summon Hercule Poirot with his very last breath?" There was no immediate answer. The stage manager, trembling with confusion, confirmed that no one had planted the card. It was not part of the act. The police would soon arrive, of course, but Poirot had no intention of waiting. "The police will search for poison in his veins, for hidden wires and mechanical tricks," Poirot said softly. "But this," he held up the card, "this is a message, Hastings, a riddle only one mind can solve." Hastings scratched his head. "But why you? You've never met the man, have you?" Poirot's expression turned almost playful. "No, Hastings. And yet, here is my name. It seems the final trick of the great Maximilian was not to vanish or escape, but to ensure Hercule Poirot himself took his final bow with him." The curtain had fallen on the magician, but for Poirot, the performance was only beginning. It was not 2 minutes after the curtain had fallen that a trembling young woman appeared at our side. She was slender, with dark hair pulled back into a severe bun, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands clutching the folds of her black dress like a drowning woman grasping a lifeline. "You are Monsieur Poirot?" she asked in a voice both breathless and urgent. Poirot rose at once, bowing with exaggerated courtesy. "I am Hercule Poirot, mademoiselle. And this," he gestured to me, "is my faithful associate, Captain Hastings. To what do we owe the honor?" "I am Celeste Duval," she said, her voice trembling anew. "I was Maximilian's assistant. Please, you must come backstage at once. He asked for you." "Asked for me?" Poirot's brows lifted. "Curious indeed, for I have never had the privilege of making his acquaintance." Celeste's hands twisted together nervously. "Not directly, Monsieur Poirot, but he knew of you. In recent weeks, Maximilian became obsessed with the idea that someone close to him was plotting his death. He said if anything happened, if the curtain fell for the last time, you would be the only man clever enough to see through the trick." Hastings made a sound of disbelief. "Surely you mean the police?" "No," she cut in, her voice rising in desperation. "The police would look for poison, for a wire cut, or some mechanical failure. But Maximilian, he believed his death would be a performance, a trick played within a trick, and only a mind like his could solve it." Poirot's head inclined, eyes sharp as needles. "Ah," he murmured, "a magician's final illusion, not for his audience, but for Hercule Poirot himself. Come, Hastings, we are summoned." I confess I had my doubts, but there was no resisting the magnetism that lit Poirot's eyes. And so, with Celeste leading the way, we stepped through the curtain and into the magician's private world, a place where reality and illusion blurred and death had taken center stage. Backstage was a world transformed. The grandeur of the Savoy's stage was replaced by a cluttered warren of props, discarded costumes, and the faint, stale scent of grease paint. Yet even here, death had left its mark. Maximilian's body had been carefully moved to a divan, his face covered by a silk cloth. Celeste clutched Poirot's sleeve. "He was afraid," she whispered. "The last week, he spoke of shadows, of hands reaching through the curtain. He said the only way to beat the trick was to understand the magician behind it." Poirot's eyes glittered. "And now, mademoiselle, the magician is gone, but the trick, it remains." He bent down, examining the playing card once more, its edges worn and bent, the ink of his name smudged slightly, as though Maximilian's hand had trembled when he wrote it. "Hastings," Poirot said softly, "do you not see? We have been invited, not to merely solve a crime, but to unravel a masterpiece. The final trick of the dying magician." He straightened, his expression one of pure satisfaction. "And Hercule Poirot, he never refuses a command performance." And so, with the curtain fallen and death calling from the wings, the case of the last trick of the dying magician had truly begun. Backstage at the Savoy Theatre had a peculiar atmosphere when viewed in the harsh light of investigation. Without the magic of footlights and velvet curtains, the place seemed strangely reduced, a world of frayed ropes, hastily repaired props, and walls streaked with old stage paint. It was, I thought, the sort of place where secrets gathered like dust, forgotten until someone, like Poirot, chose to disturb them. Poirot moved with the utmost delicacy, his patent leather shoes making not a whisper on the wooden floor. His egg-shaped head tilted to the side, his fingers clasped neatly behind his back. I could see the machinery of his little grey cells whirring already. "The stage is a world of deception, mon ami," he murmured. Every gesture rehearsed, every illusion designed to distract the eye from the truth beneath. We began in Maximilian's dressing room, a small, cluttered space perfumed with stale cigar smoke and theatrical grease paint. The mirror, framed by bulbs, reflected not glamour, but a face lined with strain, captured in old photographs pinned haphazardly along the wall. Letters lay scattered on the table, some fan mail, some demanding debts paid, and one, ominously brief, reading only, "You know what you did. You will pay." Poirot paused, lifting the letter delicately. "Observe, Hastings. The hand trembles, not in fear, I think, but in rage barely suppressed." We moved onto the stage itself, where the fateful cabinet still stood. Poirot walked a slow circle around it, tracing its edges with a fingertip. "A coffin for a magician," he said softly. How poetic. And yet, this trick was never meant to end with death. At the edge of the stage lay a thin, crumpled program sheet with the outline of the final act scribbled in Maximilian's hand. One word was underlined 3 times. Betrayal. Poirot sighed. "Already, mon cher Hastings, the story begins to write itself. A man afraid of betrayal does not fear death. He fears the truth coming out." Maximilian's trunk stood like a sentinel at the back of the dressing room, a battered leather affair, its corners reinforced with brass, and stickers from Paris, Vienna, and Cairo peeling from its sides. Its lid was closed, but something about its placement caught Poirot's attention immediately. "Observe, mon ami," he said, kneeling beside it. "The floor beneath, the dust has been disturbed only in front of the trunk. It was opened recently, and in great haste." With a deft twist, Poirot released the clasp. The trunk's interior was a jumble of silks, trick handcuffs, a collapsible cane, and the usual paraphernalia of a stage magician. But as Poirot's hand moved methodically through the contents, his fingers traced the inner lining, pressing firmly until, click, a false panel sprang open. "Aha!" Poirot's eyes sparkled. Always. The magician must have his hidden compartment, n'est-ce pas? Inside were letters, each folded with precision and bound by a red ribbon. The handwriting was unfamiliar, jagged with emotion, and the content made even me, a seasoned reader of crime, draw breath sharply. They were letters of blackmail, accusations flung with venom. They spoke of betrayal in love, financial ruin, and a trick stolen long ago, for which Maximilian was accused of ruining another magician's career. Poirot scanned them quickly, then handed me the top one. "Hastings, what do you observe?" I read aloud. "You destroyed my life, and now I shall destroy yours. The world will know what you did." I shook my head. It could be anyone, rivals, creditors, even a former lover. Poirot's smile was thin. "Exactement. That is the brilliance of such letters. They say much, and yet reveal nothing at all." Nestled among the letters was a small bottle, corked and unlabeled. Poirot held it up to the light, his expression darkening. "Poison," he murmured. "Why does a magician need poison unless he fears, what? That someone else will use it? Or, mon cher Hastings, that he may use it himself?" The trunk, it seemed, held more than props. It held the weight of a lifetime of secrets, carefully hidden, until now. It was Hastings who found it, or rather stumbled upon it, in a manner that was entirely typical of him. "Dash it all, Poirot," he said, bending to retrieve a small, glinting object that had rolled beneath the magician's work table. "It's a bottle of some sort. He held it up between thumb and forefinger, turning it to catch the light. Poirot stepped forward swiftly, taking the vial from Hastings and examining it with the reverence of a man inspecting a rare clue that wished to remain hidden. It was unlabeled, its contents a pale amber liquid that clung to the glass like syrup. "Curious," murmured Poirot, "that a magician should carry a vial of poison among his tools of illusion." Hastings frowned. "But how do you know it's poison?" Poirot gave me a look of profound disappointment. "Mon ami, the bottle is of a type used exclusively for toxic preparations. A thick glass to prevent accidental breakage, a cork stopper bound with wax, and this." He pointed to a fine trace of crystalline residue around the lip. "Arsenic, or something most unpleasant." I felt a shudder pass through me. But why would Maximilian have poison here? Surely he wasn't planning to. Poirot raised a finger. "Ah, that is the question, is it not? Was this poison intended for him, or by him?" For a moment, the idea seemed grotesque. A man who lived by creating illusions hardly needed such a crude instrument as poison. But Poirot's gaze had already drifted toward the trunk, the letters of blackmail, the whispers of betrayal. "Poison," Poirot said softly, "is the weapon of the subtle mind, the mind that fears confrontation. But a magician, Hastings, his weapon is deception, not poison." He placed the vial gently on the table, but his eyes remained fixed on it. "This," he said, "does not belong in the world of magic, which means, mon ami, that someone else has been at work behind the scenes." The discovery of Maximilian's personal diary was, in its own way, more disturbing than the poison. There was something intimate about a man's private thoughts, the unguarded confessions scrawled in the small hours, the fears and grievances laid bare in ink. It was tucked in the bottom drawer of the magician's dressing table, hidden beneath a pile of old theatre programs and dog-eared scripts. The leather cover was warped, the edges swollen, water-damaged, as if it had been dropped into a basin and left to dry. Poirot opened it with the utmost delicacy, smoothing the damp pages with his fingertips. The ink had run in places, whole sentences lost to smudges, but what remained was more than enough to intrigue. One entry, written in an erratic, trembling hand, stood out. "The final betrayal comes from within. Trust no one, not even myself." Hastings, reading over Poirot's shoulder, gave a low whistle. "Good heavens, what do you make of that?" Poirot's expression grew contemplative. "A man does not write such things lightly, Hastings. This is not the paranoia of a dying man. This is the certainty of one who knows he has been betrayed." The later entries grew even stranger, fragments rather than full thoughts. The hand in the dark. "The trick I cannot see. The daughter of shadows." "Who is this daughter of shadows?" I asked. Poirot's brow creased. "That, mon ami, is a question of great significance, for if Maximilian feared her, then she is either the key to his greatest trick, or the author of his destruction." He closed the diary gently, as though sealing the secrets back within. "One does not merely read a magician's diary, Hastings. One deciphers it, and somewhere between the ink and the silence, we shall find the truth." It was not long before the theatre's inner circle began to assemble, drawn by curiosity, shock, or in some cases, the cold inevitability of guilt. Poirot had requested their presence, and they arrived in various states of indignation and unease, as though summoned to an audition where the prize was suspicion itself. Celeste Duval was already present, her face pale, her hands trembling as she served tea with the awkward movements of someone accustomed to illusion rather than truth. Next came Victor Grange, a man with a smile so thin it seemed etched into his face, a rival magician who had made a career not only of tricks, but of publicly exposing Maximilian's secrets. Maximilian was no genius, Grange declared immediately. He was a thief. He stole half his illusions from men cleverer than himself. I could have ruined him a dozen times over. Poirot's smile was polite but razor-sharp. And yet, monsieur, you did not. Curieux, no? Lord Charles Evesham followed, an aging patron whose waistcoat strained against a stomach built on expensive dining and dubious investments. His handshake was limp, his smile forced. My money kept Maximilian afloat, he muttered. I should be mourning my investment rather than the man. Then came Henrietta Maximilian, the magician's estranged daughter. Her expression was as brittle as her voice, every word landing with controlled venom. My father was a liar, a fraud, and a coward, she said. If you're here to glorify him, Monsieur Poirot, you'll be wasting your time. Finally, Dr. Ambrose Blythe, Maximilian's personal physician, arrived, a nervous little man who smelled faintly of brandy and panic. Maximilian was dying, Blythe insisted. I saw the test myself. Liver failure. No one had any reason to murder him. Poirot said nothing at first, merely studying the faces before him with owl-like stillness. Then he murmured softly, "It is rare indeed, Hastings, to find so many gathered under one roof, all holding knives at the same throat." The suspects fidgeted under his gaze, unaware that the greatest trick was yet to come, the trick of the truth emerging, one thread at a time. After the others had been dismissed, Poirot requested a private word with Celeste. She stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself as though trying to ward off an invisible chill. "Celeste," Poirot said gently, "you were not merely an assistant to Maximilian. You cared for him." She nodded wordlessly, but Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And yet, you were recently disinherited, were you not?" Celeste's face crumpled like old parchment. "It wasn't about money," she said softly. "He said I had disappointed him, that I had broken the code of the magician's art." "Ah," Poirot's fingers tapped against his lapel. "A betrayal of craft, far more grievous than a betrayal of the heart." Tears welled in her eyes. "He accused me of spying for Victor Grange, that I had shared secrets. It wasn't true. I would never—" Her voice broke. Poirot's voice was gentle but relentless. "And when he struck your name from his will, mademoiselle, did you feel the flicker of hate, even for a moment?" Celeste shook her head fiercely. "I loved him like a father, even when he doubted me." Poirot's expression was unreadable. "We shall see, mademoiselle. Love and betrayal, they often wear the same mask." Hastings, watching this exchange, was left with a single unsettling thought. Was the assistant truly innocent, or was her devotion just another well-rehearsed illusion? Of all the suspects Poirot had assembled, none radiated quite the gleeful malice that clung to Victor Grange. He was a thin, wiry man with fingers stained by years of cheap stage makeup, a magician who had spent more time exposing others' tricks than perfecting his own. "Ah, Monsieur Grange," Poirot greeted him with a polite bow. "It seems you and Maximilian were not, how shall we say, colleagues of mutual admiration." Grange's smile stretched across his face like a poorly laid trap. "Maximilian was a fraud," he said with relish. "Every trick he claimed to have invented, he stole, and now he's gone. Perhaps the world will remember the truth." Poirot raised a brow. "And yet, you yourself have not revealed this truth before now. Curieux, no?" Grange's eyes narrowed slightly. "Because I knew his greatest trick, the one he guarded above all others. And if I revealed that, I would destroy him completely. It was my ace, my final card." "And yet," Poirot said mildly, "you hold it still." Grange leaned forward. "Because now that he's dead, it's worth twice as much." Poirot's smile was polite, his eyes sharp as a blade. The magician dies, and his secrets become currency. A curious inheritance indeed. Grange's chuckle was dry as dust. "You'll never guess it, Poirot. Not even you." Poirot only inclined his head. "We shall see, monsieur. After all, Hercule Poirot has performed a trick or two in his time." Lord Charles Evesham was precisely the sort of man I had encountered at more than one regrettable club luncheon. A man whose waistcoat buttons strained dangerously, whose confidence exceeded both his fortune and his intelligence. He shook Poirot's hand limply, his palm damp. Terrible business, terrible. Maximilian was a damned fool, but he was my fool, you see. I kept him afloat, invested heavily. Ah, said Poirot with exaggerated sympathy. And now, the investment, it is no more. Eversham's face flushed slightly. I had protection, of course. A policy, as it were. Insurance, no doubt, Poirot said, his voice smooth as silk. And now that Maximilian is dead, the payout, it saves you from ruin. Eversham's lips twitched, neither confirming nor denying. I suppose you could say that. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And when Maximilian announced his illness, did it please you, my lord? After all, the magician, he dies, and the curtain rises for your fortune. Eversham's brow dampened visibly. Are you accusing me? Non, said Poirot lightly. I observe only, and observation, my lord, is a most dangerous trick. Eversham's protest was weak. I had nothing to do with it. Poirot merely smiled. We shall see, my lord, we shall see. Of all the suspects Poirot had gathered, Henrietta Maximilian was the only one who entered the room already armed, not with a weapon, but with resentment sharp enough to cut glass. She stood stiffly, her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles shone white. Even before Poirot could pose a question, she declared, Whatever you think, I did not kill him. If anyone had reason to, I suppose it was me, but I didn't. Poirot bowed slightly. Mademoiselle, you are most efficient. You present your defense before the charge is made. Curieux, no? Her jaw tightened. There's no need to pretend. I hated my father. That's no secret. Ah, Poirot said gently. Hate, the most powerful of poisons. And what was its source, if I may ask? Her voice was clipped. My mother died because of him. It was during one of his stunts, a trick with water tanks and escape chains. She was helping him rehearse, and something went wrong. She drowned before anyone could reach her. Hastings gasped, but Poirot's face was impassive. And you, mademoiselle, you have carried this burden for many years. Henrietta's eyes flashed. He never even admitted it was his fault. He called it an accident, as though that made it better. He ruined my mother, and in doing so, ruined me. Poirot folded his hands. And yet, mademoiselle, you were here tonight, to watch his final trick. She hesitated, then shrugged. I wanted to see if he had the courage to face me one last time. Poirot gave a small, unreadable smile. You are most honest, mademoiselle. Sometimes, honesty is more dangerous than deceit. It was Hastings, as usual, who tripped over the clue without realizing it. While Poirot lingered in the dressing room, deep in thought, I found myself pacing the corridor outside. My foot nudged something half hidden beneath a stage curtain, a playing card, its edges singed, the surface charred beyond recognition. Poirot, I called, holding it up. Another one of these, though I'm afraid this one's been through a fire. Poirot appeared at my side in an instant, his eyes gleaming with interest. Ah, mon ami, you have the luck of the clumsy man. You stumble always into fortune and confusion alike. He took the card carefully, examining it with the air of a man greeting an old acquaintance. Do you see, Hastings? This card, it bore the name of the killer. I stared. But you can't possibly know that. Poirot smiled faintly. Observe the placement. The card was hidden deliberately, but poorly. It was meant to be found, yet not too easily. A clue left to tease the mind, as only a magician would. But the name's burned away, I protested. Poirot's fingers tapped the air. Just so. And why burn the name, Hastings, unless it was a name that would surprise even the killer themselves? I gaped at him. You mean the killer left this card? Poirot's smile was pure mischief. Sometimes, Hastings, the magician fools even themselves. We have not yet seen the final trick. I returned the card to my pocket, heart pounding with excitement. For all the years I had followed Poirot, I knew when we stood at the edge of something extraordinary. And this was such a moment. Celeste Duval was no stranger to performance, but under Poirot's penetrating gaze, the mask slipped almost at once. She sat opposite him in Maximilian's dressing room, her fingers knotting and re-knotting the handkerchief in her lap, her eyes flickering everywhere except at Poirot himself. "You are nervous, mademoiselle," Poirot began, his voice almost soothing. "This is understandable. But what is not understandable is why you are afraid. After all, you are innocent, are you not?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again, like a goldfish caught in the wrong bowl. I told you everything, Monsieur Poirot." "Ah," Poirot's brows lifted. "Everything you say. Let us test that, shall we?" He tapped his fingertips together, the sound light but deliberate. "You have been Maximilian's assistant for how many years?" 7, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 7 years, and in that time you knew him intimately, yes? You would know if he had secrets or fears. You would know if his life was complicated. Celeste swallowed hard. He was a difficult man, brilliant but difficult. "And you," Poirot said gently, "you were more than an assistant to him, were you not?" A flush crept into her cheeks. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Poirot said, "that you knew him not only on the stage but off it, in his moments of weakness, of fear, of anger, in his moments of affection." Celeste's hands shook. "It was never, he was like a father to me." "Ah," said Poirot softly, "but he was not your father." She shook her head fiercely. "No, never!" Poirot leaned back, his expression unreadable. "It is a curious thing, mademoiselle. When a person insists too strongly, they often reveal the very truth they wish to hide. Hastings, watching, whispered to me, 'Do you think they were—' Poirot silenced me with a glance. "The truth, mon ami, it is like a rabbit in a magician's hat. It must emerge, even if reluctantly." If Celeste was a woman concealing wounds, Victor Grange was a man nourished by spite. He arrived for his interview with the swagger of a man who had waited years for his enemy to fall and was determined to enjoy every moment of it. "About time someone dragged that fraud's name through the dirt," he said, settling into the chair with all the grace of a man who knew he was next in line for the spotlight. Poirot smiled politely. "You speak of Maximilian with such warmth, monsieur." Grange snorted. "He deserved everything he got, and more." "Ah," said Poirot mildly, "yet you and you were once, how shall we say, collaborators." Grange's eyes narrowed. "If by collaborators you mean he stole half my best material and passed it off as his own, then yes, we were collaborators." "And yet," Poirot said, "you never exposed him fully. You hinted, yes, you taunted, but you never revealed his greatest trick." Grange's smile stretched thin. "Because I knew something else. Something that would ruin him forever. Something even the gossip sheets wouldn't print." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "And this secret? It concerned Mademoiselle Celeste." Grange leaned forward, enjoying himself immensely. "You could say that. Maximilian always said he treated her like a daughter, but I know better. There were rumors." "Rumors?" Hastings asked, horrified. "Surely you're not suggesting—" "I suggest nothing," Grange said silkily. "I only repeat what people whispered, and you know what they say. Where there's smoke—" Poirot steepled his fingers. "And yet, monsieur, smoke is often the magician's greatest ally. It conceals the real trick." Grange smirked. "Then I suppose it's your job to find the real trick, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot inclined his head. "Just so, monsieur. Just so." As Grange left, Poirot turned to me. "You see, Hastings, the rival magician, he plays his role well, but whether his whispers are truth or misdirection, that is what we must discover." I had expected Henrietta Maximilian to storm into the interview with the same unvarnished hostility she had displayed earlier. Instead, she arrived coldly composed, every hair in place, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Yet there was something brittle about her stillness, like glass held under too much pressure. Poirot, who could read such subtle cues as easily as most men read the morning paper, inclined his head in greeting. "Mademoiselle, you have been most frank about your dislike for your father. It is refreshing." Henrietta's mouth twisted into something that was not quite a smile. "There's no point pretending. I told you before, I hated him. What else do you want to know?" Poirot's fingers twitched, as though conducting some invisible orchestra. "Ah, but there is a difference, mademoiselle, between hatred and murder. One is a passion, the other, a decision." "I didn't kill him." The words came too fast, too sharp. "No." Poirot's expression was gentle. "And yet you threatened him, did you not? Hours before his death you were overheard saying, what was it? 'I'll see you in hell before I forgive you.'" Her face reddened, and for a moment, her composure cracked. "I said a lot of things. That doesn't mean I—" "Words, mademoiselle. They are often sharper than knives." Poirot's gaze sharpened, especially when they are spoken to a man who already feared his own death. She exhaled shakily. He deserved worse. "And yet," Poirot said softly, "you were here. To watch him die? Or to make peace before the final curtain fell?" Henrietta's silence stretched long enough to make me uncomfortable. Finally, she whispered, "I wanted to see if he'd apologize." "Did he?" Poirot asked. Her smile was bitter. "Magicians don't apologize, Monsieur Poirot. They just change the trick." Poirot rose. "And sometimes, mademoiselle, they leave the trick unfinished, for others to complete." If Henrietta's grudge was personal, Lord Charles Eversham's was purely financial, though in his own way the man appeared equally aggrieved. The moment he settled into the chair opposite Poirot, his waistcoat buttons straining heroically, he launched into protest. "I had nothing to do with this unpleasantness. Yes, I funded the man, but a patron can hardly be held responsible for the sudden death of his investment, can he?" Poirot's smile was faint. "Ah, but it is curious, my lord. A man facing ruin, he might see great opportunity in such an unfortunate event. No." Eversham's jowls flushed pink. "You have no idea how the world of theatre works, Poirot. Men like Maximilian, they burn through money faster than a theatre burns through candles. If he died, well, yes, the insurance would have been a relief, but—" "Ah!" Poirot's hand fluttered gracefully. "The insurance. The safety net beneath the tightrope. But what if Maximilian— he had cut the rope himself?" "What do you mean?" Eversham's eyes narrowed. Poirot produced a folded paper from his pocket. "A copy, my lord, of the policy you so thoughtfully arranged. And a curious detail. It was cancelled. By Maximilian himself." Eversham's face drained of colour. "That's impossible." "On the contrary," Poirot said softly, "it is most possible, and most revealing." Hastings, ever the blunt instrument, blurted out, "But why would Maximilian cancel a policy that would benefit his backer?" Poirot's smile was pure mischief. "Ah, Hastings, sometimes the greatest trick is not the one you perform, but the one you prevent." Eversham sputtered. "I had no idea." "Which leaves us," Poirot said, rising, "with a most unfortunate truth. You had more to lose by his death than by his survival." As we left the room, Hastings whispered, "Do you really think he did it, Poirot?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Mon ami, everyone had reason to kill the magician, but only one had reason to spare him. Dr. Ambrose Blythe had the look of a man who had spent his life avoiding both exercise and scrutiny. His collar was too tight, his spectacles too large, and his hands fluttered nervously every time Poirot spoke his name. "Doctor," Poirot began, his voice mild, "you were the one who declared Monsieur Maximilian was, how shall we say, at death's door." Blythe tugged at his collar. That's correct. Advanced liver failure. Very clear signs. Poirot leaned forward slightly. And yet, there was no autopsy report confirming this diagnosis. Blythe's eyes darted left and right. Well, the man collapsed and died in front of a full audience. What more proof do you need? Proof, mon cher docteur, said Poirot, is like a trick. It is not what the eyes see that matters, but what the mind knows. Blythe's hands fluttered again. The symptoms were all there. Jaundice, fatigue, abdominal swelling. And yet, Poirot interrupted smoothly, I have spoken to the theatre's wardrobe mistress. She remarked only yesterday that Monsieur Maximilian's complexion was positively glowing, and the stagehands say the man was as energetic as a fox. That's nonsense, Blythe spluttered. I had the blood work. Where is it, doctor? Poirot asked softly. For I have inquired at your laboratory, and no such tests exist. Blythe's face drained to the colour of week-old porridge. You see, Poirot continued, the magician's greatest illusion was not performed for the audience, but for you. Hastings gaped. You mean, he wasn't dying? Exactement, said Poirot. And you, Dr. Blythe, you either lied to him or for him. Blythe wrung his hands. He begged me, said it was all part of his grand plan, some ridiculous trick to outwit an enemy. I thought it was harmless. Harmless? Poirot's voice sharpened. Monsieur, you told a healthy man he was dying. That is not medicine, that is theatre. Blythe slumped back in his chair, a broken man. Poirot stood, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. You see, Hastings, he said, even the doctor, he was part of the act. After the interviews concluded, Poirot sat down with his little notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration. I, ever the faithful assistant, hovered nearby, trying to make sense of my scribbled notes. Mon ami, Poirot said, tapping his pen, the alibis, they are like a magician's top hat. They look solid, but they are full of holes. He began to lay out the facts, one by one. Celeste, he said, claims she was with Maximilian all day, and yet the stagehand saw her leave the theatre for nearly an hour before the final performance. She said she went for a walk, I offered. Poirot's expression was pitying. Ah, Hastings, do you walk in the middle of a performance? Non. Something called her away. He moved on. Victor Grange insists he spoke with Maximilian backstage before the show, yet Maximilian's diary clearly states he had refused all visitors that day. I frowned. Perhaps Grange exaggerated. Or, said Poirot, he spoke with someone else, someone who wanted to be mistaken for Maximilian. Poirot's pen moved swiftly, drawing lines between names. And then there is Mademoiselle Henrietta. She was overheard making a telephone call before the performance. To whom? I asked. That, Poirot said with a smile, is the question. She claims it was to her solicitor, but the theatre switchboard logs show no call to any solicitor's office. Then who? Patience, Hastings, said Poirot. The trick is not yet finished. He stood abruptly, hands clasped behind his back. You see, mon ami, what fascinates me is this. Each suspect had an alibi, and yet none of the alibis align with the truth. When the curtains rose, all of them claimed to be somewhere else, doing something innocent. And yet Maximilian lay dead, a trick gone wrong. I frowned. What does that mean? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. It means, Hastings, that this is not one trick. It is many. A stage within a stage, and a lie within a lie. He tapped his notebook. But every trick, it leaves a seam, a thread where the illusion frays. And I, Hercule Poirot, I shall pull that thread. Poirot had been in Maximilian's dressing room for quite some time when I entered, drawn by his quiet mutterings. His eyes were focused on the magician's tattered diary, a book whose very pages seemed to sigh under the weight of its secrets. What is it, Poirot? I asked, eager to join in on the discovery. Poirot didn't look up. Victor Grange, he said simply, tapping the page. He claimed to have spoken with Maximilian backstage just before the final trick, did he not? I nodded. Yes, that's right. He said they had a private conversation. Poirot's lips curled slightly. And yet here, he turned the page delicately. Maximilian wrote, I refuse to meet with anyone today. Only the final trick awaits, and I have no time for idle chatter. I peered at the words, but they seemed unambiguous. So Grange lied. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, that is what we must ask ourselves, Hastings. Lies and truths, they are often two sides of the same coin, yes? I felt the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. But why would he lie about something so simple? Poirot closed the diary with a soft snap, his eyes narrowing. Mon ami, it is not the conversation that matters, it is the timing. Victor Grange, you see, wanted to be seen talking to Maximilian. That is the key. The truth lies not in what was said, but in what wasn't. I looked at Poirot, still uncertain. So what does this mean? Poirot's smile returned, but it was colder this time. It means, Hastings, that Victor Grange is hiding something far worse than a lie. As the investigation pressed on, Poirot seemed increasingly preoccupied with a single question: the mystery man Henrietta had called before her father's death. I had noticed that her alibi had gaps, and Poirot had pointed out the suspicious phone call. But we had no details. Poirot, I asked, have you learned anything about the man Henrietta was speaking to? Poirot held up a finger, as though he had already solved the problem in his mind. Not yet, but I have my suspicions, mon ami. The theatre's switchboard log shows a call from Henrietta at precisely the moment her father collapsed. But it does not show to whom. I frowned. You think it was important? Poirot's eyes glittered. Everything is important, Hastings. A single thread can unravel a whole tapestry. He moved quickly, retrieving a small phone book from Maximilian's desk. After flipping through it, he stopped on one page, his finger pointing to a name. Ah, here it is. Henrietta's call went to Dr. Ambrose Blythe's office. Quite curious, is it not? I blinked. Blythe. But he was Maximilian's physician. Why would Henrietta call him? Poirot stood, pacing slowly. Exactly, Hastings. The doctor, the one who falsely diagnosed Maximilian's condition. Henrietta, in her fear and anger, must have wanted to speak to him. Perhaps she knew something he didn't. Do you think she was involved with Blythe in some way? I asked. Poirot turned, his eyes keen. I think, mon ami, that Henrietta knows far more than she has told us. She has hidden her fear behind anger. And now I begin to wonder if it is not Maximilian she sought to protect, but someone else. As the hours stretched on, and the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, I could see the subtle shift in Poirot's demeanour. The calm, almost philosophical detachment that had always marked his approach was slowly replaced by an intense focus. His mind was clearly unravelling a mystery far more complex than we had originally imagined. One evening, as we sat in a quiet corner of the theatre, Poirot spoke softly, almost to himself. You see, Hastings, we have been too focused on the how Maximilian died, and by whose hand. We have not yet asked the question that matters most: why? I leaned forward, not entirely sure where Poirot was leading. Why? You mean, why did he die? Or, no, Poirot interrupted, his voice quiet but insistent. The question is not why Maximilian died, Hastings. It is why he chose this death. Why did he stage this entire illusion of his death? I felt a chill run through me. You mean he didn't die by accident? This was all part of a plan. Poirot's eyes met mine. Exactly, mon ami. A plan, but not the one we have been chasing. Maximilian knew his time was short, and so he chose to die in the greatest way he could imagine, through his final, most deceptive trick. But why? I asked, confused. Why would he do that? Why stage his own death? Poirot rose slowly, his movements deliberate. Because, Hastings, he did not fear death. He feared being forgotten. He wanted to live forever, but not in the hearts of his family, or even his fans. No, he wanted to live in the legend he would leave behind. I stared at Poirot, piecing the implications together. So, his death, it was a performance. A final trick? Precisely, Poirot said, his voice soft but filled with quiet triumph. He staged his death to ensure that no one would ever forget him, to be remembered forever as a master of illusion, of deception, the greatest magician the world had ever seen. I sat back, stunned. But then, Poirot, what happened? If it was all planned, why did he die for real? Poirot's eyes glinted with the quiet certainty of a man who had solved the most difficult of riddles. Ah, Hastings, it was not the plan that failed. It was the magician himself. The final trick became the final mistake. The Savoy Theatre, still cloaked in the shadows of tragedy, seemed to breathe with an eerie anticipation as Poirot led the gathering to the stage where Maximilian had taken his final bow. The grand velvet curtains, once full of promise and excitement, now felt heavy, almost like a tombstone. The very air seemed to hold its breath. "All of you," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the quiet like a fine scalpel, "are here because you played a part, however small, in this tragic illusion. But now, the time has come for the curtain to rise once more, and this time, you will see the truth." I stood to the side, watching as the suspects shuffled nervously. The familiar faces, Celeste, Victor Grange, Henrietta, Lord Evesham, and Dr. Blythe, all had their own part to play in the grand drama. They were now caught in the web of deception that had been spun around Maximilian's death, unsure whether they were the players or the audience. Poirot gestured to the empty cabinet at the centre of the stage, the very one Maximilian had used for his final trick. "Here it is," he said, "the heart of the deception. The trick that fooled the world and yet fooled no one at all." "I don't understand," said Lord Evesham, his voice shaky. "What is all this about, Poirot?" Poirot smiled. "Mon ami, there is always a story behind the story, a secret within the secret. And tonight, the greatest trick of all will be revealed." He stepped back, allowing the others to approach the centre stage. The weight of the moment seemed almost too heavy for them, each of them now realizing that the truth was about to be unveiled. Poirot raised his hand, and silence fell. "Let us begin the final act. The curtain falls, but the story, it does not end here." The spotlight shifted as Poirot continued, "And so, I shall tell you the truth about Maximilian's last trick, and how each of you played a part in making it happen." His eyes scanned the room, lingering on each of them. No more secrets, only the truth. The silence stretched as Poirot stood, his gaze fixed on Celeste Duval. She had been standing at the back, her eyes darting nervously from face to face. She seemed like a ghost, timid yet uneasy, as though she knew the end was approaching, but didn't yet understand what form it would take. Poirot broke the silence with one simple statement. "Mademoiselle Celeste is not just Maximilian's assistant." The room stiffened, the tension palpable. Henrietta's eyes widened, while Grange's lips curled into a sneer. Poirot continued, his voice deliberate. "No, Celeste Duval is Maximilian's illegitimate daughter, born of a love affair Maximilian kept hidden for many years. He had kept her from the world, from everyone, including his wife, and from his own daughter." Celeste's face drained of colour, and for the briefest moment, I saw the tremor of fear run through her. It was a fear that went beyond the revelation itself. It was a fear of being exposed for something far deeper than mere secrecy. "What? What are you talking about?" Celeste whispered, her voice a mixture of disbelief and terror. Poirot's gaze never wavered. "Maximilian was a man of great secrets, Hastings, and one of those secrets was his daughter, Celeste. It was only recently that she learned the truth, that she was his child, and not just his assistant." A collective gasp rose from the group, but Poirot raised his hand to quell their reactions. The pain of that discovery was too much for her, but it was not the cause of his death. No, Maximilian's trick, the greatest trick, was that he used his own family as pawns in a theatrical production that blurred the lines between life and death. Celeste trembled as she finally found her voice. I never wanted this. I never wanted to be part of his sick games. I only wanted to be his daughter. Poirot's face softened for the first time, though his eyes remained sharp. And yet, mademoiselle, you were part of the game. You had no choice, and in your ignorance, you played your part beautifully. The revelation hung in the air like a dark cloud. I looked from Celeste to the others, who were now utterly gripped by the truth. And yet, I couldn't help but feel there was something more, something still hidden, lingering beneath the surface. Poirot turned slowly toward the group, his lips curling in the faintest of smiles. And now, my friends, the last trick is almost complete. Victor Grange sat rigidly in his chair, a self-satisfied smirk on his face, as Poirot laid the groundwork for his revelation. He had been silent for too long, watching the others, perhaps waiting for his moment to step forward as the hero of his own story. But now, the truth would unmask him. Poirot leaned forward, his voice calm but resolute. Mr. Grange, you are a man of many talents, illusion being one of them. You have made a career of revealing secrets, yet now I find it curious that you have kept one of your own. Grange's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Poirot smiled thinly. You were bribed, monsieur, to uncover Maximilian's greatest secret. But you were never told the whole truth, were you? Grange's face flushed with surprise, his smile faltering. What are you talking about? Poirot raised an eyebrow. The secret Maximilian promised you was not his greatest trick, but the key to a fortune. He told you he would reveal his most elusive illusion, but in truth, he was only using you as a pawn in a larger game. Larger game? Grange scoffed, trying to regain control. I was promised the biggest exposure of my career. Poirot's tone sharpened. You were promised nothing, monsieur. The magician never intended to share his secret. He left you with nothing, a mere illusion, as he had left so many before. Grange's face twisted in a mixture of anger and humiliation. You can't prove that. Poirot's eyes flashed. Ah, but I can. You see, Grange, you were played in the same way Maximilian played his audiences, distracted, misled, and ultimately discarded. Grange's shoulders slumped as the weight of the truth hit him. I've been a fool. Poirot nodded. Not a fool, monsieur, but a player who failed to recognize the true master of the game. Henrietta Maximilian had been quiet through much of the investigation, her bitterness always simmering just beneath the surface. But now, Poirot's gaze fixed upon her as if she were the final card in a magician's hand, a card that had yet to be revealed. Mademoiselle Henrietta, Poirot said, his voice measured, your father's death was a terrible blow, no? Henrietta stiffened, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Yes, it was. But it was not the blow you feared, was it? Poirot's eyes narrowed. What you feared was losing the inheritance, the one that would fall to you upon Maximilian's death. But I suspect you had already taken steps to ensure that, hadn't you? Henrietta shot him a quick, angry glance. What are you implying? Poirot's voice softened, almost with sympathy. You made that phone call just before the performance. To your lawyer, did you not? Henrietta's eyes widened in alarm, but she quickly masked it with an indignant expression. It's none of your business. Ah, but it is, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently. You see, I have learned that you were in the process of contesting your father's final will, a will that would have left you with nothing. But by calling your lawyer, you were preparing to secure your claim, just in case. Henrietta's face twisted with frustration. You think I killed him for money? You have no idea what he put me through. Poirot's voice grew firm. No, mademoiselle, I do not believe you killed him for money. But you did use his death to further your own cause, and that, too, is part of the illusion. Henrietta stared at Poirot, her expression hardening as if she were closing herself off completely. "I did what I had to do, and I don't regret it." Poirot's gaze softened slightly. "The trick, mademoiselle, is not in the money, but in the power it gives." That is what Maximilian truly understood. Lord Charles Evesham had never been a man to keep his emotions in check. His self-assurance had always been wrapped in a thick veneer of arrogance, but now, as Poirot closed in, the cracks in his facade began to show. "You are a man of great ambition, my lord," Poirot began, his voice gentle but sharp, "but ambition alone cannot cover up the truth." Evesham glared at Poirot, his voice low with barely concealed anger. "What truth? What are you implying?" Poirot smiled, as if he had already won. "I imply that you were involved in Maximilian's death, but not in the way you think. You had more to gain from Maximilian's death than you ever would have from his life." Evesham's face turned pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." Poirot continued, his voice calm and steady. "You see, my lord, you had placed a life insurance policy on Maximilian, did you not? But here's the twist. The policy had been secretly cancelled months before his death." Evesham's eyes flickered, but he quickly masked his shock with a tight smile. "That's impossible. You must be mistaken." Poirot shook his head, not moved by the protest. "I am never mistaken. The policy was cancelled, and you were left with nothing. And yet you had bet everything on Maximilian's death. A calculated risk, you might say." Evesham's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "I never wanted him to die. I just wanted to recover my losses." Poirot's smile returned, but it was without warmth. "Ah, monsieur, that is the great illusion. You never needed to kill him, yet you played your part in his final act." Evesham's shoulders slumped as the weight of his actions caught up with him. He was not a murderer, but he was complicit in a web of lies that had stretched far beyond Maximilian's death. Dr. Ambrose Blythe had always presented himself as the embodiment of medical professionalism. His white coat, his precise speech, and his well-maintained appearance made him seem a trustworthy figure. One would never suspect he could be anything but what he claimed to be. But Poirot had his doubts. "Doctor," Poirot said calmly as he sat across from the man, "you have spoken much of Maximilian's diagnosis, but there is something you have not said, the diagnosis itself." Blythe blinked nervously. "What do you mean, Poirot? Maximilian was dying. I told you this." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Ah, but you did not prove it, mon ami. There were no tests, no results, no substantial evidence that Maximilian had a terminal illness. You see, Hastings, this is the first deception." Hastings, who had been watching quietly, leaned in. "You mean Maximilian was never really ill?" "Exactly," Poirot replied. "You see, Dr. Blythe was in on Maximilian's grand illusion. Maximilian knew he had a short time left, and so he orchestrated this deception with Blythe's help." Blythe looked trapped, his face pale. I didn't want to be a part of it. Maximilian begged me. He said it was all part of his last performance." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "A performance, you say? And yet, doctor, you had no qualms about lying to the man, telling him he was dying when he was perfectly healthy." "Why?" Blythe's voice trembled. "He was an artist. He needed the drama, the final curtain. I thought it would be harmless. I never intended for anything like this to happen." Poirot's voice grew firmer. "It was not harmless, doctor. You helped him stage his death, an illusion that went terribly wrong. You were part of the trick. But now, you are part of the truth." Hastings looked at Poirot, still stunned. "So, Maximilian didn't really die of illness. It was all part of a greater plan." "Indeed, Hastings," Poirot said. "A plan that would have left him immortal in the world's eyes, if only it had not gone wrong." The scene was now set, all the players gathered, but there was still much to untangle, the final trick, the one Maximilian had planned so carefully, had gone horribly awry. Poirot stood at the center of the stage, eyes scanning the room of suspects. You all were part of it, you see. Each of you had a role in Maximilian's last grand illusion, but in the end, it was not the audience who was deceived. It was you, the players. I leaned forward, eager to understand the full scope of Poirot's thinking. But Poirot, I asked, how did Maximilian plan to die if he wasn't actually ill? Poirot's eyes glittered. Ah, mon ami, that is the genius of it. Maximilian intended to fake his death during the final performance. He would stage his own death in front of the audience, with the whole world watching. I could hardly believe it. You mean he planned for everyone to think he was dead? Exactly. It was to be his ultimate performance, a final trick that would ensure his immortality. The illusion of death would be so convincing, so perfect, that even those closest to him would believe it. But why would he want to do this? I asked, still struggling to understand. Why fake his death in front of everyone? Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice was unwavering. Maximilian feared being forgotten, Hastings. He wanted to live forever in the minds of his audience, to be remembered as the greatest magician who ever lived. But there was a catch, mon ami. The trick was not just to die, it was to frame someone else for murder. Frame someone, I repeated, shocked. Who? Poirot turned slowly, his eyes locking on Victor Grange. Grange, monsieur, was to be the one accused of murder. Maximilian planned to disappear, leaving only the evidence that Grange had murdered him. It would be a twist that no one would see coming. A final act of revenge against a man who had been his rival. I looked at Grange, who now seemed less the triumphant showman and more the man caught in his own web of lies. But something went wrong, I said slowly. Poirot nodded. Indeed. A crucial part of the trick, a carefully timed poisoning, was sabotaged. Maximilian did not merely pretend to die, he was poisoned for real, and the trick turned from illusion to tragedy. Grange, who had been so carefully set up, was left with nothing, an unwitting pawn in a deadly game. Grange looked furious. You can't prove that. I didn't touch him. I never. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. You didn't touch him, but you were part of the plan. You were set up to be the fall guy while Maximilian staged the perfect trick. But it was not to be. The magician's death was real. I turned to Poirot, realizing the full depth of what he was saying. So, it was a trick gone wrong. A plan for fame, for revenge, and for immortality that ended in death. Poirot's face was grim. Indeed, Hastings. But you see, Maximilian's mistake was this. He underestimated the one thing no magician can control: fate. The stage was set for the final curtain to fall. The suspects gathered, each waiting for the inevitable revelation. Poirot, standing tall at the center of the room, took a deep breath before speaking. His voice filled with quiet authority. Mon ami, he began, addressing the group. You all played a role in Maximilian's final act. But now, I must tell you the most tragic part of this performance. The room grew still, as if the very walls of the theatre held their breath, waiting for the truth. The culprit, Poirot said, his eyes scanning each of the suspects, is none of you. Not the rival magician, not the estranged daughter, not the worried patron. The true culprit is the one who acted out of love and fear, and in doing so, caused the greatest mistake of all. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Mademoiselle Celeste, Poirot continued, his gaze locking on her. You were not only the assistant, but you were also the protector, the one who sought to keep Maximilian safe. And it is that very act of protection that led to his accidental death. Celeste's face drained of colour. She opened her mouth to protest, but Poirot held up a hand, silencing her. Let me explain, Poirot said softly. Maximilian, in his delusional paranoia, believed he was being targeted by an assassin. You, mademoiselle, in your love for him, believed that someone had tampered with his props. You were convinced that the trick, the final escape act, was to be sabotaged by someone else. Celeste's hands trembled as she looked down, her lips quivering. I only wanted to protect him. I thought he was in danger. I thought if I switched the props, he'd be safe. I didn't mean for... Poirot nodded. And so, you switched the prop, the vial that Maximilian was to use for his dramatic poisoning. You replaced it with a real poison, not realizing that in doing so, you were not saving him, but instead sealing his fate. Your mistake was the very thing that killed him. Celeste's face crumpled in horror, her hands gripping her throat as if she could choke back the truth. No, I never meant to hurt him. I loved him. Poirot's expression softened. You believed you were protecting him, mademoiselle. But you see, sometimes, the protector becomes the destroyer. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, the weight of Celeste's actions hanging heavily over everyone present. With the truth now revealed, the room settled into an eerie stillness. Every suspect now knew the key to the puzzle, the deception that had so cleverly played them all. But Poirot was not yet finished. His voice, always measured and composed, now carried a certain gravitas as he addressed the group. Maximilian's final trick, you see, was not just his staged death, Poirot said, his voice cutting through the silence like a fine blade. No. His final trick was the most dangerous trick of all. He managed to deceive not only the world, but also himself. Hastings, ever the curious observer, looked at Poirot with a mixture of confusion and admiration. You mean, he never intended to die, Poirot? Poirot's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. Ah, mon ami, that is the greatest part of the illusion. Maximilian believed his own performance. He thought he could control death itself, pulling the strings from the other side. But in the end, it was not his death that was the greatest trick. It was his self-deception. He turned to face the suspects, his eyes gleaming with understanding. You see, Maximilian's greatest illusion was the one he performed on himself. He lied to himself, believing that his death would immortalize him, that it would make him forever remembered. But in truth, it was his paranoia that led to his undoing. His final trick was a tragedy, not a triumph. Poirot paused, allowing his words to settle over the group like a dense fog. But the real danger, mon ami, is not in the trick itself. No, it is in the illusion. The belief that we can control everything, that we can manipulate fate and life and death as if we were merely performing for an audience. He took a step back, his gaze sweeping over the gathered suspects. Maximilian, in his desperation, lost sight of what truly matters. And now, the world will remember him, not for his magic, but for the tragic end to his final trick. The room was silent as Poirot's final words sank in. The greatest trick, it seemed, had been not the illusion of death, but the illusion of control, and the realization that none of us could truly control fate. The room was thick with silence, the weight of the truth pressing down on every one of us. Celeste stood in the center, her body trembling, as Poirot's final revelations circled her like a vulture. I watched her closely, her pale face, the trembling of her hands, the way she avoided looking at anyone. Poirot had said everything that needed to be said. He had pieced together the mystery, and now the pieces were falling into place. But Celeste, poor Celeste, seemed to have become the center of it all, the one whose actions had unwittingly triggered the tragic chain of events. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Celeste whispered, her voice barely audible. I never meant for him to die. Poirot stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Mademoiselle, you have already admitted that you switched the props, that you believed you were protecting Maximilian from an assassin. But what you did not see was the devastating result of that mistake. Her breath caught in her throat, and she finally collapsed into a nearby chair. I thought if I could just make sure the trick was safe, everything would be fine, she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't understand. I didn't realize. I didn't know that the poison was real." Poirot's eyes softened, though his words remained firm. "You acted out of love and fear, mademoiselle, but you did not see the full picture. Maximilian was already playing his final trick, and you, in your attempt to protect him, became part of his ultimate illusion." The tears started to fall, the floodgates opening as the full weight of her actions sank in. I didn't mean it," she sobbed. "I didn't mean for him to die. I just wanted him to be safe." There was no more pretending, no more secrets. Celeste's confession hung in the air like a fragile thread, unraveling everything. For the first time, I saw her not as the loyal assistant or the tragic figure, but as someone who had been trapped by her own love, her own desire to protect, in a cruel twist of fate. Poirot sighed, his voice soft but resolute. "It was a mistake, mademoiselle, but it was a fatal one, and now the truth must be set free." The room fell into stunned silence as Celeste's tears continued to fall. The guilt, the regret, it was written on her face, as clear as day. As Celeste's confession echoed through the room, a heavy silence descended. It was as though the entire world had paused, each person grappling with the enormity of what they had just heard. Henrietta was the first to speak, her voice laced with disbelief. You mean to tell me that all this time I've been fighting for nothing?" she cried, her eyes wide with shock. "That Maximilian's death, the one I've been mourning, the one I thought would secure my inheritance, it was all a lie." Poirot's eyes never left Henrietta as he nodded solemnly. "A grand illusion, mademoiselle. One so well crafted that even those closest to him could not see the truth." Henrietta's lips trembled, and for a moment she seemed on the verge of collapse. "But I hated him," she spat, her voice breaking with emotion. "He never cared for me. He ruined my life, and I hated him for it." Poirot's gaze softened. "The illusion of hatred, mademoiselle, it blinds you to the truth. You thought you were fighting for something, but the battle was already lost. Maximilian's death was never about you, or about any of you. It was about his final performance, the greatest trick of all." Henrietta staggered back, her hands clutching her head. "Then what was I doing all this time?" she whispered. "What was it all for?" Lord Eversham, who had been silent up until now, let out a bitter laugh. "So it was all for nothing," he muttered, his face contorted in anger. "The money, the insurance, everything. It was all a waste. We were all played, fooled by a man who wasn't even dying." Victor Grange, too, was visibly shaken. His usual confidence had evaporated, leaving behind only humiliation. "A bloody game," he muttered, shaking his head. "I spent years trying to expose his tricks, and in the end, I'm the one who looks like a fool." Poirot's voice cut through the murmurs of disbelief, as sharp as a razor. "You see, my friends, the greatest illusion was not Maximilian's escape trick or his faked death. It was the way he manipulated all of you. He played you against each other, knowing that in the end, the truth would be the last thing any of you would see." The weight of his words hung in the air, a final devastating revelation. The illusion was shattered, and with it, all the carefully constructed walls of denial and guilt came crashing down. The stage was set. The grand illusion that Maximilian had staged, one so intricate, so meticulous, that it had left us all tangled in a web of deception, was about to be fully revealed. The time had come for Poirot to pull back the curtain and expose the truth. I stood off to the side, watching as Poirot, with his usual flair, began to reconstruct the puzzle. Maximilian, the magician, was never just an entertainer, Hastings. No, he was a master of illusion, not just on the stage but in life itself. Poirot began, his voice calm but laced with an unmistakable intensity. "And as with every illusion, you must look closely. It is not what you see that matters, but what you don't see." He turned to the group of suspects, their faces still a mixture of disbelief and guilt. When Maximilian staged his death, he did not simply choose to die. He chose to control the narrative. Even in his final moments, he was still playing the ultimate trick. Poirot walked slowly to the center of the room, where the torn playing card had been placed. The card, which had been found near Maximilian's body, seemed almost innocuous in the grand scheme of things. But Poirot saw something that no one else could. "This card, mon ami," Poirot said, picking it up delicately, "was a part of the illusion. It was no mere clue, it was a message. You see, Maximilian knew that death would not be enough to preserve his legacy. He wanted to ensure that he was remembered forever, as the magician who could trick death itself. And so, he planted this card for me to find, bearing my name, an invitation to reveal the truth." I stepped forward, still trying to piece things together. "But how does that explain the diary? And the second torn card?" Poirot's eyes twinkled as he spoke. "Ah, Hastings, the diary." Maximilian was not just writing his thoughts, he was writing his final trick. The contradictory entries, the ones that suggested his paranoia, were carefully placed so that they would point to a faked illness, one that would deceive not only his audience, but also those closest to him. He knew that death would be the final act, but he wanted the story of his last trick to unfold even after his passing. Poirot continued. "The second torn playing card, the one burned beyond recognition, was meant to be the final twist. It was the clue that would make everyone wonder who was the killer. And it would point the finger at one of you, but the truth, as always, was hidden in plain sight." "Hidden in plain sight?" I repeated, still trying to understand. Poirot nodded. "Yes, Hastings. Maximilian's greatest trick was not his death. It was his ability to control the story, even after his death. The illusion was that he would be remembered forever as the master of deception, and this was the ultimate performance." He turned to face the group of suspects, each now standing in stunned silence. "You see, mon ami, Maximilian's death was not the final act. It was only the beginning of his legend." As Poirot's words hung in the air, the gravity of the situation settled over us all. The illusion had been unveiled, and we were left to contemplate the depths of Maximilian's plan. Hastings, ever the curious observer, looked at Poirot with a furrowed brow. "But Poirot, what was Maximilian's greatest trick? The trick that made him immortal?" Poirot smiled softly, his expression almost poetic as he answered. "Ah, mon ami, Maximilian's greatest trick was not the illusion of death, but the illusion of immortality. He knew that death would come for him, but he also knew that by creating a legend, a story so grand and dramatic, he would live on forever in the minds of those who heard it. His true magic was his ability to deceive not just the audience, but time itself." He turned, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "In life, the magician hides the truth from the audience. But in death, I, Hercule Poirot, am the one who reveals it." The room fell into a hushed silence, as if the truth itself had frozen the air around us. Poirot adjusted his tie with a certain flair as he turned to me, his eyes glinting with that familiar sparkle of satisfaction. "You see, Hastings," he said with a wry smile, "while a magician hides the truth, I, Hercule Poirot, reveal it. A trick is only as good as the audience's belief, but in the end, it is the truth that always wins." He looked at me one last time, his face softening. "That, mon ami, is the real magic." And with that, he turned on his heel, leaving the room in silence. His final trick complete, his legacy unveiled for all to see. As the final curtain falls on this grand illusion, we are left with one undeniable truth. No matter how cleverly a mystery is hidden, the truth will always find a way to surface. Maximilian's greatest trick was not just in deceiving his audience, but in deceiving even himself. He believed he could control life, death, and his legacy. But as always, Poirot's keen powers of observation revealed what lay beneath the layers of deception. Poirot's method has always been to observe, deduce, and unveil the hidden truths. It is through this psychological reasoning, not just the facts, that he exposes the intricate webs woven by those who seek to manipulate the truth. It's a lesson we can all carry. Illusion may deceive for a time, but the truth is always revealed in the end. Now that you know the truth behind Maximilian's final illusion, what do you think was the most significant clue that Poirot uncovered to reveal the real murderer? Was it the torn playing cards, the diary entries, or perhaps something even more subtle? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this Hercule Poirot mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more thrilling detective stories to life every day. Stay tuned. More Poirot mysteries are coming soon, and you won't want to miss a single one.